Welcome to Conversations from the Edge of Consciousness. I'm your host, Kristine Madera. For me, and possibly for you, the inner world of consciousness has always been much more real and way more fun than the so-called real material world. Growing up, I thought I was alone in this, but I'm not. There are a lot of us, and far too many have no one to talk to who shares this experience. I've been lucky to cultivate a community of friends who love to talk about the energies, ideas, and vibrations that are pushing the edges of our own consciousness, as well as our collective consciousness. In Conversations from the Edge, we share our conversations with you. Welcome to Conversations from the Edge. This is your host, Kristine Madera, and we are back today with Jana Roemer. And Jana is an astrologer and a yogi who has synthesized 20 years of study and teaching of astrology and yoga nidra to create astro nidras, which is a lying down meditation where the body really relaxes and the awareness remains online. And you're able to do some very deep body and mind work and incorporate astrology into that. So what we talk about with Jana is how astrology works in the body, but also how astrology can be kind of like a life coach as we move through the various seasons of the zodiac. So today we're going to be talking about Cancer. So let's just start by welcoming Jana. It's so nice to have you back.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I just love our conversations and love that we're making this a regular thing.
Oh, me too. And I'm learning so much because astrology is always interested in me, but truly the way that you approach it is makes it much more fun and interesting, and it sticks a little bit better than it does in other ways that I've looked at it before. So I really appreciate you bringing your expertise and your insight and just the depth and the breadth of knowledge and experience you have to our conversations. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I find the depth available within astrology really exists as you learn to embody it and bring it into your life. There's something to be said about these themes that we go through cyclically together as earthlings. Cancer season is such a perfect example of that because Cancer season, when the sun moves into Cancer, it is also the summer solstice if you live in the northern hemisphere. If you're in the southern hemisphere, it's the winter solstice. And so in either case, either hemisphere that you're in, it's either the longest day or it's the longest night. You know, it's a time of renewal. It's a time of new beginnings. In Cancer season specifically, though, too, something that I love, and I actually really like pulling in the southern hemisphere with all of the signs because they're in opposite weather than us, is that Cancer itself, the archetype, lives in the belly and the breasts. In a female gendered body, it will specifically live in the womb. We talk about the Cancer archetype as being the mother,
Mhm.
but not just any mother. It's the divine mother. It's like the ultimate nurturer. It's the place where, if we look at the zodiac from the perspective of Aries being the baby and Taurus being the crawler, exploring the world through their senses, and Gemini being the first vocalization of why, in Cancer season, now all of a sudden the little one is teaching you how they need to be loved. And oftentimes what we see in motherhood around the age of 5 and 6 and 7. This is where parents will start to experience a different kind of like they're having to adjust their parenting again. Okay, now my kid has different needs. They're in kindergarten. How do I let go and let my child go to kindergarten? Now they have their own life. I have to make sure that they're well resourced and they know they're loved unconditionally so they can have confidence to go out into the world and be themselves. And at the same time, we have to create like a mama bear boundary for them where they can feel safe to emote that when they
Hmm.
go out into the world and they start to learn about relationships that are not of your inner circle, that sometimes the world is harsh and cruel, and you can come home and you're going to be safe at home, and you can tell me about your troubles, and I'm going to hold you safe, and you can tell me about the things that I don't want to know, and I'm still going to love you anyways. Like that's the
Wow.
stage of life of Cancer.
You say it so perfectly. And how nice if we all had that at that age. It's not always what you
It's not
perceive,
always the
even if it's
case.
what your parents, think that they're bringing. It's not always the perception on that level.
That's a really good point that you bring up, because sometimes many times we don't get the childhood that we want, or our mother doesn't show up in the way that we need to be loved. And
Hmm.
so in our adulthood, we have to learn how to reparent ourselves. Biggest core work that we do in our life, oh my goodness, I just got full body chills saying this, is to heal our mother wound and to forgive our
Mm.
mothers, and to learn how to love them as a person, not the mother, to release them of the responsibility of being the one to nurture you as you learn to nurture yourself. If we get it when we're a kid, wow, you are so emotionally privileged, like you're so privileged to have a mother that actually could create a safe space and that could nurture your emotions and hold you sacred and not reject you and accept you no matter how you show up. That is such a privilege. And if you didn't, then Cancer season is our time to give that to ourselves, and then also teach other people how we need to be loved.
And I would imagine there's an element in there about learning how to love ourselves as well,
Wow.
because oftentimes that's, part of the core wounds around love is the inability or unwillingness to love ourselves unconditionally and to accept all of us.
Absolutely. And if we look at this from an elemental perspective, Aries was initiatory fire. It was the beginning of spring. Taurus was fixed earth. I always like to think of backtracking to Taurus for a second, but I like to think of Taurus, this relationship with gravity. How do I get up and crawl? And how do I stand up? Like there's something there, and it's like you're fixed on the earth and you're learning how to rebel against that fixedness. Gemini, it's all about the mind and the inquisitive nature of the mind, and it's an air sign, and how quickly the mind changes as it takes in new information. And then Cancer is cardinal water. And so it's the waters of initiation. It's the waters that bring new life. And so I think of this as the amniotic fluid, that
Hmm.
is the fluid in your mother's womb. And this is, you're in the dark, like all life begins in a dark space in the womb. And in this womb, there's not just you and your mom working, there is a magical, ancient, infinite, all knowing guide that is a part of you, because your father's sperm and your mother's egg come together, but there's another force that brings a spark to that lets life take place. And that spark it's the mixture of your soul and your divinity that says, okay, this sperm and this egg are going to make a human, right? So
Wow.
maybe it's
Yeah.
divinity first and your soul comes in later. Who knows exactly what the timing is of that, right? But there's life force that allows for that to happen. And then your body holds from the moment that sperm and that egg and that flash of light. If you want to hear a cool story about that, I'll share. Meet your body, those cells hold the codes of how to multiply into
Hmm.
everything that's needed to make your human body. Okay, so they were doing these tests to figure out the viability of embryo in vitro studies. The scientists that were the doctors that were working on this, they were looking in a very dark room, and they realized that there's a lot more, but I'm giving you the short version. They realized that at the moment of conception, when the sperm and the egg met, there would be sometimes no light,
Mhm.
sometimes a small flash of light, and sometimes a big flash of light. What they learned, you can find actual, like, this is a real legitimate scientific study. What they learned is that the larger the flash of light, the more viable that embryo would be to take life in the mother's womb.
Oh my gosh. It sounds so fantastical, but I mean, it sounds so obvious, right? It's because that
Right.
life force is this animating force that's not physical, but it animates the physical being. So it does seem like the more there is of that, the more actual light that would generate at that magical moment.
Yeah. And when you look at it that way, if that's inception, if that's the
Hmm.
waters of Cancer, that's where we initiate life from. Part of what we're doing in Cancer season is we are returning to our essential, most innocent and divine self. Infinite, we are immortal, there is that flash that is you that was there before the cells met. It came to meet the cells. There is a part of you that is non-physical. That's
Yes.
Cancer season. That's what we're connecting to in Cancer season.
Wow, and you say it so, I mean, got me all tingly. The way that you say it, because it's so true. And there is so much magic in life and to life and as life. And sometimes it just feels such a drudgery that we forget that. So I'm glad that there's a whole season that we get to remember that.
Yeah. And then it's also what life force then also sustains you, because it's
Hmm.
also, the milk of the mother, that first source of sustenance. And so, if we're looking at understanding ourselves during this time, it's like, what is my metaphorical mother's milk in this
Hmm.
life? And you look at what a baby is orienting to when they go to breastfeed. The baby, sure, they're looking for food, that
Hmm.
kind of nourishment, but they're also often looking for comfort. They're looking for
Hmm.
safety. If kids get scared, or if they're unsure, they're in a new environment, that they are not kids, babies, they often want to go to the breast. And I think of my grandmother. She passed away when I was 7. Like, being snuggled into her giant boobies was like my safe place. Like, there's something about
Uh-huh.
that sweet spot right there. And so then we use that metaphorically as like, like, what is your metaphorical safe boobies to snuggle into? And what are you
Hmm.
drinking? What life force do you need to be drinking in order to know that you are safe and that you are loved and that you are accepted? If not only just for yourself, or from yourself, like you brought in. And so I always like to use Cancer season as an opportunity for like a little PSA for all the humans that have breasts, to do
Hmm.
a breast check. Like, just feel them, like, feel for lumps, and do your breast massage and get some nice oils and get into your boobs. And then also, it's a reminder, maybe you need to have a pap smear, or check in with your womb health, and
Hmm.
your own physical health in that area of your body, because this area of the body during Cancer season, we have a greater opportunity to heal anything that is needing healing during this time. Now, for those
Wow.
that aren't in a female gendered body, or maybe gendered sex, if the sex of the body doesn't have a uterus, we can look at the belly in general. You
Hmm.
can look at like, everything in the belly. You can look at, gut health really goes in Virgo season more so than than Cancer season. You can just look at your overall belly, like, how do you feel in your belly and your breasts? The animal that we see representing Cancer is a crab. And when
Hmm.
you think of that crab, it's all about having a safe space, right? Like, the crab
True.
is
Yeah.
a little animal with, I like to think of a hermit crab. I relate more
Hmm.
to a hermit crab than a regular crab, because we use our house as our exoskeleton,
Uh-huh.
right? And so Cancer also starts to take into account all matters of the home.
Okay.
So how is everybody that's cohabiting relating with each other? And is the home a safe place where you can, when the world is cruel and tough, that you can all fall apart? And are the people that you keep in your home safe?
Okay.
And if they aren't, what are we going to do about that? And, you know, these are just some good questions for Cancer season. And sometimes that means tough conversations, just like that tough love that a mama gives. And sometimes that means, I mean, everybody's in different stages of life. You know, if you think of roommates, sometimes you just need a roommate. Sometimes you don't have a roommate and you need to find a roommate. And sometimes it's about a romantic relationship or a fizzled relationship. Or sometimes it's like a single parent with a child or a empty nester or whatever. You know, there's so many different ways that we hold home, but it's looking at how we can nurture the relationships within our home and create it as a safe place for you to emote. Because Cancer, as a water sign, is the first really emotional
Oh,
sign.
interesting. Okay. How does the energy of the Cancer season this year really support us in this? Because when we were talking in our last podcast about Gemini, you gave us a teaser about Jupiter going retrograde and all of these planets that were going to be going retrograde as we entered into this season. To me, it sounds like, you know, we're really caretaking that deep part of us that needs to be nurtured so that we can support ourselves through the rest of the zodiac.
Yeah. So, what I just a little recap in Gemini season, well, pre Gemini season, Pluto station retrograde. In
Hmm.
Gemini season, Saturn station retrograde, then Mercury station retrograde. And then on the first day of Cancer season, we have Jupiter stationing retrograde. And then on the 25th of June, we have Neptune stationing retrograde. And so we're going to have 5 planets retrograde for the beginning of Cancer season. Now, if you remember, I talked about Gemini season as where the nervous system, it works with the nervous system and how we're taking information into the world. And last month when we talked, I said that the way that we nurture our nervous system, it then signals the endocrine system, and the endocrine system is more the domain of Cancer. And so when we do, and Gemini is also the lungs, and so when we do our breath work or we do our perception work or we do our listening work or we do our unpacking of our belief systems work or all of those things that we talked about in Gemini season, it actually sets the scene for what
Hmm.
happens in Cancer season, because the nervous system is telling the endocrine system how to, like, what kind of chemical cocktail to make. And
Okay.
so with all these planets retrograde, we are really turning the lens inward. We're looking at ourselves with Jupiter going retrograde in Pisces. And I also mentioned that the Mercury retrograde is a really good time to pay attention to our dreams. I forgot to mention that Jupiter moves into Pisces, which is super dreamy. Jupiter stations retrograde on the first day of Cancer season in Pisces. So it's in
Hmm.
a trine, a sign trine with the sun in Cancer. So it's even more watery and more emotional. And Pisces is one of the most emotional signs, where Cancer is quite emotional, but it'll often keep it to itself. Or if you get to know a Cancer's emotions, you are very special because they're letting you inside their shell. And Cancer has a very slippery slope where they can mm, maybe become a little bit mm, codependent. I'm
Hmm.
like, can I think of a nicer word to say? It's not a nice word. It's just what it is. They can become codependent because the chances of Cancer to start to lean into their support system to co-regulate their emotional landscape grow quite high. And if we look at childhood development and adulthood expression,
Hmm.
it's often the events that happen in that age of like 3 or 4 years old to 7 or 8 years old. If we experience trauma during this time, or big isolations or abuse, that Dr. Gabor Mate, do you know his
Hmm.
work at
I
all?
do. Yeah, I love him.
Oh, I love him too. He talks about how addiction is a manifestation of unresolved childhood trauma. And
Hmm.
addiction we see in all of the water signs. and in Neptune talks about it. But when we look at that codependency, if that goes unaddressed, it is super easy to codependency to turn into some form of addiction. And so this
Okay.
is a bit of the shadow side. And the way that
Mm-hmm.
we meet that is with really beautiful and firm boundaries, which is the opposite of Cancer is Capricorn.
Mm-hmm.
Capricorn is systems and structures and boundaries, and it's ruled by Saturn, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
Saturn and Capricorn actually sets the foundation of the home, the structure of the home, the walls of the home. It has the lock on the door of the home. And then Cancer is what happens inside of that home. So part of the way that we help Cancer to feel safe is we have the structure of home, so then they can be alone and process their emotions, because all water signs need emotional processing time. They need quiet time. So I always
Okay.
laugh when a air sign and a water sign are together, because they really need to understand each other's emotional needs, because an air sign needs to talk it out and a water sign needs to silence it out. And to an air sign,
Okay.
that can be like the worst torture ever, because they're like, I just need to talk about it. And the water sign is like, stop talking to me. I'm going to say things I don't want to say. I need you to give me my space. I'll come back when I'm ready. So the first full moon is in Capricorn. And I actually really like this year, the full moons happen before the new moons. But I like this for this year because there's so much upheaval and so many people have anxiety, and we're dealing with pressures that we've never dealt with before. And we're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with, just so much unknown. The fact that the full moon in Capricorn comes before we get super vulnerable with the Cancer new moon is so nice, because we're doing our boundary work first. And that's what this is about. It's like, what is your boundary work? Like, do you got to block some people on your social media? You got to switch the channel? Do you have to say, hey, your gift of anger is not welcome in my home anymore? Do you have to say, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
interested in arguing with you about this topic any longer? Like we can set some really good boundaries that then create that safety so that we can feel. Because the other side of this Cancer is that, like, what is stronger than a mama's intuition? But we need time to feel it. And that means that we have to feel our emotion all the way through to the end of emptiness. And in that void, that is
Mm-hmm.
our strongest connection to intuition that you could ever imagine. So this Capricorn full moon, it's so lovely. The challenge with it, I would say, would be Pluto is opposite Venus. And so it's really challenging our relationships. And there might be some challenge to our harmony, but that's only going to be the motivation to set those boundaries that will serve us great, like serve us very well in the long term.
So is the boundary setting, is it always with the external things like the outside of the house, or is this also applicable to looking within? Because we talked about this a lot last time, and setting your boundaries with yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Like, and I would look as thematically, I would look at what boundaries do you need to set in order for you to be able to stay in your inner authority instead of
Mm.
being washed around by the waves of, I don't know, we'll say social media yelling at you. Do you have to speak up on this topic? It's like, do you need to put a boundary there? Do you need to put a boundary on your social media use? Do you need to put a boundary on information consumption? Do you need to put like, do you need to put a boundary on your procrastination?
Mhm.
Do you need to finally be like, no, I am going to commit to this type of discipline? Because it could be boundary, or it could be boundary, or it could be discipline. Have you been slacking? Have you been a little bit lazy? Have you been enjoying summer a little bit too much and you forgot to brush your teeth at night and you need to get back in the discipline of brushing your teeth at night?
I mean, you think about it developmentally, that's the age at which you really do need to learn your own personal inner discipline so
Mhm.
that you can be in community with other people and not be like a little giant little baby tyrant.
Yeah.
So it's there's a lot of that inner discipline learning between that 3 and 8 years old. And then when you think about it, it really is how you learn how to be in the world and how
Mhm.
you learn to be who you are in the world and to be in relationship in the world. So there's a lot of the inner and the outer, but that safe place to be yourself too. That
Mhm.
it seems like sometimes we don't pay as much attention to as perhaps we should.
Exactly. And then right after the full moon, Neptune stations retrograde. So that there now we have 5 planets retrograde, which is nice. I actually really appreciate all these retrograde planets because
Mm-hmm.
you could just press pause, just be like, I'm just going to take a timeout right now, a self-induced timeout, or I'm going to take some time for me. Give yourself an opportunity to self-regulate a little bit more. It's nice this whole year we don't have Venus or Mars going retrograde. Those two can be
Okay.
really challenging. Mercury
Okay.
goes retrograde 3 or 4 times a year. Jupiter goes retrograde every year. Saturn goes retrograde
Oh,
every year and a half
okay.
ish. It's hard to say exactly a time because it's a year and a half to 2 years we'll see a Saturn retrograde. And then when you
Okay.
get further out, it becomes more consistent but less impactful. So on July 1st, we
Mm-hmm.
have Mars opposite Saturn. So Mars is in Cancer, or sorry, Mars is in Leo and Saturn is in Aquarius. And this can be a really interesting. I was just I always do a I always have a chat with Nadia, who works with me over at Attune to the Moon, and we go through the astrology. And we were going back and forth about what Mars and Leo feels like. And I was like, it's
Mm-hmm.
loud. And she's like, I really like Mars and Leo, though. And I was like, yeah, I really like Mars and Leo, but this is like everybody's centering their own passion. Like, my passion's the most important. And it's
Oh,
sitting opposite Saturn, and Saturn's saying, like, put a lid on it. Saturn's like, chill, And so this is interesting. It might feel like that little kid for the first time being disciplined of, hey, you can't be the center of attention all the time. There's 12 other kids in your class. You got to be quiet and let the other kids speak, or you have to be quiet and let the teacher speak. And it's that first like reprimanding of your creative expression that could
mm-hmm.
re-emerge during this opposition, which is kind of interesting when you think about it, because a lot of people in this world have held back their creative expression or their authentic self or what they really want to say or what they really want to do in life. And Saturn is like, it's like those little windy cars where you pull them back and it says, no, you're not going to go. But then you let it go and the
Uh-huh.
car like wheels across the ground so quickly. And so if we play this one right, we can pull back and be like, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't talk about that. Or maybe I shouldn't be so vocal on this one thing, but I really want this to get out into the world. And so you let the car zoom on that particular topic. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yeah. And it's a nice way that you talk about that. And I think too that this whole creative expression, like I think one of the things that we learn with creative expression, like your example of a kid in school, a very expressive kid in school, learning how there's other kids in school that also need to express, is that tempering, I suppose it would be with Saturn, of understanding like our creative expression and how it arises in us, and then and respecting that in everybody else, because when it's arising in you, it feels like it's the most important thing in the world. And so we've been in this place where everybody's expressing in every possible moment of every day as loud as they can in many ways, without listening, which is what we talked about last time. So finding that balance between being receptive and being creatively receptive and being creatively expressive, because they both feed with each other and work with each other. And you can't have the expressive without having the receptive to balance it out as well, especially in community.
Yeah, I love that. And we all have to learn that lesson.
Yeah.
And how that lesson gets learned creates an imprint in us.
Hmm.
And some kids have an easier time learning that lesson than others, depending
Yeah.
on their need for expression or to be seen or to be heard. Or some kids like to be the center of attention, and some kids would rather just lay back and be dreamy and watch the show. And so it plays out differently.
Oh yeah. Well, I was thinking about it with adults.
Oh, well,
all
yeah,
of us,
okay.
all of us in our, continuing childhood these days. So I was actually thinking about it in terms of adults, but we learn that as kids. But I think in adults is where we really can now take advantage of the season and look at where have I been in transmit? Where have I been in expression? Where maybe I can actually pause for a little bit and be in some reception in order to express more appropriately or more concisely, like you were talking about, or in a particular direction. and
Yeah.
begin to really look at the balance between expression and reception, because we don't tend to talk much about reception, but we do certainly. Everybody likes to express.
And then how about that human, regardless of age, that is speaking, 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 and nobody's hearing them, and they're like, "I'm not being heard," and it's like, "But you just talk nonstop. You don't say anything." And so this is an opportunity to pull in
Yeah.
and be like, "What really matters to me?" Yeah, and then we have a couple other kind of challenging aspects on the 4th of July. So we have
Oh.
Mars square Uranus. Same day, we have the Sun square Chiron. And then we have Venus sextile the North Node, which comes in with a bit of a save. So I'll explain that. So in Gemini season, we talked about Uranus, and Uranus is a planet of new technologies that have electricity running through it.
Hmm.
Uranus governs Kundalini energy and awakening, tyranny and dictatorship, and like really harsh control. Yeah, so it's different, but you can also see how that fits. Like if somebody's going for a Kundalini awakening experience, it
Mm-hmm.
requires control and discipline and mind. Like they have to really work and get all the things right in order, and so they're controlling a whole bunch of things to have this Kundalini awakening experience. Or there's the opposite side of that, that's like a spontaneous lifting of Kundalini energy because circumstances just end up being right. And Kundalini energy has a time of ripeness. In astrology, around 42 years old, Kundalini energy moves easier. So, and that's the same thing with, and it's because it's a Uranus opposition. So, where Uranus is in your chart and where
Mm-hmm.
Uranus is in the sky, they're exactly opposite each other. And so that creates
Okay.
this opportunity for Kundalini to move really easily in your spine. Now, Uranus
Hmm.
also governs the nervous system because our body is a technology, and the nervous system is where our electricity is conducted in our body. Uranus can sometimes be shocking or spontaneous, or it can cause upheaval. And so it's squaring Mars, and Mars, I talked about it, is in Leo. And so we've got this like awakening energy squaring our expressive energy. I'm a little bit excited for this actually, because not all squares are bad. And when I look at the bigger picture of astrology, I mean, forget astrology, just look at society. We need something to break the tension. And it could get broken through softening, which I don't particularly see, or it could attention could break through like a battle. We could finally just go at it. But I think this could potentially bring forth some leadership. Now, that leadership, because Leo is leadership, there might be some tension between leadership that like causes a little bit of break in the tension, that all of a sudden there's a breakthrough, because this Uranus and Taurus is all about the breakthrough. It's all about the breakthrough. We
Hmm.
can look at it from like, it's actually a signature of earthquakes. There's lots of signature in earthquakes that never
Right.
translate into a physical earthquake on the planet, but you can think of like, what does an earthquake do? It relieves pressure, right? It's like
Yeah.
pressure's
Well, and
relieved.
July 4th in the United States is our Independence Day.
Exactly.
It's the so it that sounds like
A
a
big
day that could
opportunity
have a
for
lot of
release.
fireworks that day and a lot of different levels. So that should be
Yeah.
interesting.
I think there's going to be a big release. I think Americans put a lot of pressure on the 4th of July being a big celebratory day. I think there was I forget which politician, they were like, we'll be open by the 4th of July, or I don't know, I forget what it was, but I think there's some expectation for some
Hmm.
freedom on that day. And I think people will take liberties whether it's granted or not. Yeah. And then that comes right in because the sun square Chiron is like people taking action on their wounds. Done with lockdown, I'm going out and partying, or I just think that we're going to see something very interesting happening on and around the beginning of July. And also, I think it might be help. I think it might. I'm not leaning towards doomsday. I'm leaning towards this is going to be a good release, because the sun is sextile Uranus the very next day, and sextiles are favorable energies. So that means like our radiance and our self-expression and like our soul shine is being um assisted through this Uranian energy. To me, it feels good. I'm not scared of this one. Yeah.
But it reminds me of when, like when you have a really big breakthrough, like the moment of the breakthrough is like this drama filled, even if it's a great breakthrough, there's this big release and there's drama and there's emotion and there's, the old stuff and there's the new stuff. It's like everything's happening at one time. And then once it calms down, like then you've got then that transformation is in process and is happening. But it sounds like there's a really interesting sort of flashpoint and then the release and the kind of bringing it into something that's or landing on the positive versus landing on the negative at the end of that.
Yeah, that's what I'm holding that image in my head. And if all of you guys that are listening can also hold that image in your head,
Yes, please.
well, in our hearts, maybe is a better place to put it. But
Yeah.
and then we have Mercury square Neptune again. We just had that in Gemini season, but because Mercury is traveling backwards and now it's traveling forwards. Oh, I forgot to say that. But right after on the 22nd, we have Mercury station direct. So we have that energy coming back around again. It's that dreamy, communicative, psychic energy. And then we have Chiron, which was square on the 4th. It's now in favorable energy with our relationship. So I'm hoping there's like a little bit of compassion, more listening. We're still in that restraint of before it was Pluto and Venus opposite each other. Now it's Saturn and Venus opposite each other. So we're getting a little bit more mature in our relating with each other. And then we have Venus and Uranus. They're going to square each other. So it's like a little bit more mature and then a little bit of tension. But now can we hold the charge? And if we've done all of our work of like sitting in opposition and sitting in that discomfort and learning how to listen, and if we've dismantled some of our belief systems, and if we've done our good work, I think this could actually just continue blowing off a little bit of this steam so that by the time we get to the Cancer new moon, which depending on where you are in the world, it's either going to be on the 9th or the 10th, the Cancer new moon, hopefully we can just be better at like mothering each other, nurturing each other, being more
Yeah.
empathetic and compassionate with each other and be like, oh, I'm kind of hoping that what happens is those relationships that really mean a lot to you, that became victims of the divide, that we can have some repair. Cousin, I love you so much. I'm so sorry. I know we see this differently, but I love you. I've known you since I was born. Let's get over this and remember that first.
Yeah.
Or, like maybe there's an opportunity for repair in this one. Maybe not, but maybe.
Well, and
Nice
it
if
also it's people's choices. So if the opportunity is there, and so if you choose the opportunity, when as the energies are supporting that, you're much more likely to be successful in that and to move forward with that if than maybe other times. But people are free to not do that as well. But I do hope collectively we come to a place where we're more able, we have a little more distance from our own emotions and a little bit more able to play nicely together in our common space.
Well, I don't foresee distance in our emotions because it's Cancer season and it's
Okay.
super emotional. But what I see is like the blowing off of some steam.
Okay.
I see like an opportunity for some tension release that would, like, have you ever been in an argument with somebody and then they're like, but I really like you. And then it's like, oh, you really like me? And it like you're fighting and fighting and fighting. And then it's like, but I like you and I'm sorry. And it's still got a little bit of an intensity to it, but you're starting to recognize like it doesn't, but there's underneath here is a great love or great respect or whatever it is. Right. And then just
Yeah.
after that, Gemini or Mercury finally leaves Gemini on the 11th and moves into Cancer, which will make our communication more loving. So that's like we're leading to this. It's like perspective shifting, coming together, blowing off some steam, and then our Mercury goes into Cancer, and hopefully we can enjoy the sunshine and get outside in nature and float in the ocean or gather around the pool or whatever it is. And then, as we can carry forward to Leo season, almost all the astrology, with the exception of one that I'll share with you, is all favorable. Our relationships, our communication, what we're learning, even coming together in like the passion and the desires and like Venus and Mars, they come together in a conjunction. So it's like they have a little they have a little conference call up in the sky, cosmic conference call. And they're like, okay, what do you need? Okay. Let's figure out how to get this along. Let's reset our cycle. I know it's been a little bit rough. Mars had a lot of time in Aries, a lot of fighting energy, a lot of battling energy, but it's an opportunity on the 13th of July to reset that cycle. The challenge that I see is on the 17th of July, we have the sun opposite Pluto. And so it's like this ego death. So what do we do? How do we show up in an ego death? And then shortly after that, the Mercury is square Chiron. So then it's like, well, how are you going to communicate about that? Are you going to own your part in it? Or are you going to project? And so again, it's like, it's always a choose your own adventure novel.
It really is. But, as you say, and as you lay out, if you're doing your work along the way, you can minimize the bumps and really take advantage of the good things and the wonderful views and the expansive emotions and the connections and things without having to be kind of at the mercy of the energies. You can actually use them in ways that are most healing and beneficial for you.
Yeah, and imagine if we had more people paying attention to the astrology and we're like, oh no, Cancer season is the time when we learn to love ourselves better and we learn to nurture ourselves better and we need less from others because we're feeding ourselves. If we were collectively working on that.
Knowing when things are going to be rough, like, because we have these different points in time where tempers and things are in opposition and they're flaring and things, but to know that and say, okay, well, I'm feeling this. And so, of course it feels like, it's the most important thing in the world to scream your truth in one form or another, but to realize that part of that is the energies flowing through you that are part of the astrological energies, so the impersonal energies that we experience personally. And so to be able to say, oh, okay, so if I'm feeling really strong emotions on these at this particular time, it may be because this is the energy of the moment, and I can choose to recognize that and not have to act on those in the same way I might if I was unconscious of these energies flowing through me. So I think there's a lot of ways that you can use this to begin to understand, like, where you might be triggered and what constellation of energies are the ones that really get to you, and to be able to depersonalize it a little bit and say, yeah, I'm feeling really angry right now, but I know a lot of this is just the energy flowing through me, so I'm just going to choose to go to the beach in my mind for a while, and
Yeah,
then I'll come back to this in a few days, and then it probably wouldn't have nearly the charge.
exactly. It helps us understand the impermanence of it.
Yeah, and that we're going through these things collectively too. So, and everybody has their own astrology as well. So we've got these big collective things, everybody's got their personal stuff, and it's all of these things that are moving together, and yeah, having a little bit more understanding about what we're moving through together, I think could be really helpful. So maybe we need an astrologer in like every government in the world. So
I'll take the job. I'll do that job. Actually, I want nothing to do with politics,
no,
but
I know
I
what you
think
mean. I
it
was
would be
just
very
laughing about
helpful.
that. It would, or to have some, have it on the stage somewhere about, and I know there's people all over YouTube and things doing this, but to really be tapped into like what's happening, because it's so accurate when it comes to conflicts between countries and things that are happening, like the lockdowns and the virus and things like that. It expresses itself and it shows itself very accurately. And
Mhm.
when you can understand that these things aren't always random, that there are, there's some behind the scenes energies, it might be easier for everybody to kind of take a deep breath and say, well, how do we ride these energies in the most productive way possible?
Mhm. 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 Exactly. And then we're done. That's the end of Cancer season.
Well, that sounds like a fun and interesting season. And I'm really liking the call to what you said in the very beginning about really nurturing yourself, mothering yourself, reparenting yourself, about, recognizing where those wounds that you have are, and to come at them in a different, more nourishing way rather than living them out again and again, because it really is. I mean, everybody does this. Everybody gets parented, hopefully, and everybody has to reparent themselves, because I think that's just how we're built as humans. If everything was perfect, we wouldn't really develop and grow. We kind of develop
That's
because
right.
of we have challenges. And so one of the ways that we can work with those challenges is to go back and nurture those parts of us that felt that took the brunt of those challenges at the time that we probably didn't have any of the skill set to be able to navigate those challenges with any kind of finesse at all.
That's right. Yeah. It's the adversity that makes us stronger. We got to
Mhm.
find it. Yeah.
All right, Jana. So, is there any last little things you want to say about Cancer season before we wrap up?
I think just to really take it seriously and give yourself what you need. Like just the act of being self-aware enough to be able to identify your own needs and then to do something about it. Like if that was the only thing you focused upon, that would be a good thing.
Well, that sounds like a worthy focus. All right. Well, thank you so much. And you can find Jana's links and ways to contact her at conversationsfromtheedge.net, including her website Attuned to the Moon and a 50% off code for the Expander Pass, which gives you the astro nidras and all kinds of amazing things in there. So check that out. And join us next month when we talk about Leo season. Any tidbits to tease us with?
Teaser?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Leo lives in the spine and the heart, and it's all about play and discovering your authentic self. So we'll dive in a little deeper to that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this conversation now, and I look forward to talking with you about Leo coming up soon.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me.
This is your host, Kristine Madera. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation from the edge of consciousness. You can find all our conversations at conversationsfromtheedge.net. You'll also find links to schedule a private conversation with me or any of my friends, as well as tools to help you expand your own consciousness and explore what's possible for you outside the boundaries of your current perceptions. Feel free to use this podcast to start your own conversation by sharing it with friends, on social media, in your blog, or even in your own podcast. And as always, live the adventure of pushing your own edge. It's the most amazing adventure there is.